and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. Last year, when the pandemic hit us, one of the industries that sort of was impacted the most, you know, it was the airline industry. This time, and it is among the industries that have recovered quite fast and is now maybe back to pre-pandemic levels. But to understand how technology had to cope up with an industry going down and coming up, we have with us Mr. Sumesh Patel, who is president of SITA Aero. Mr. Patel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Nandu.
Mr. Patel, can I or can I start by asking you whether my statement that airlines were among the most impacted by the pandemic, is that true?
So maybe I would add, Nandu, it was not just the airline. Yes, airline were one of the major stakeholders who were impacted, but at the same time, I would say even the airports were equally impacted, and so was the industry around it. So be it hotel, the hospitality industry, all of them were hit really hard during the pandemic time.
In 2022, 2 years after the pandemic first hit us, do you think we are back to normal, or is it still like a bit behind on where it used to be?
So maybe before I start, for our audience, just if they know who SITA are. So SITA is an integral part of the air transport industry. We are fully owned by and dedicated to the airlines and airports around the world. We serve around 1,000 airports globally. Almost every airline in the world uses some or the other services from SITA, and we also serve 70 governments. So clearly, when the air transport industry went through a difficult period during COVID, we were equally suffering and we were hit. So we say in SITA that if the air transport industry sneezes, we get cold. So we also went through a really difficult time during COVID. And going back to your question in terms of are we back? I would say in batches, right? So especially for us in India, yes, the domestic traffic is almost back to where it was pre-pandemic, right? So on 9th of October, we hit almost about 4 lakh passenger traffic, right? Which is very close to what we were in 2019. So that's really good news for us. And we see, new airlines also joining the fray and offering the services. So there's clearly a potential in the market. But if we look at the international market, even for us in India, the international traffic is still not picked up, right? So it is about 60 to 65%. Globally, the regions like Americas and Europe has really recovered much faster. For us in Asia, we were really slow in recovery. And today, we are close to about 35 to 37% recovery on international markets. So there is still a lot of scope for us to recover.
Could you explain how SITA offers this huge technology framework which looks at so many airports, so many airlines across the world? How complex is running a system like that?
So basically, if I would like to maybe break it up in few areas, right? So if you look at technology, there are various components in terms of technology. The first, I would say, the aircraft communication, right? So which is air to ground, which is, helping the airlines to be safe in the sky when they're flying. So how do they communicate air to ground? So that area we provide, we are the largest service provider of the aircraft communication in India. And we, at the same time, we also help airlines to meet ICAO and DGCA mandate through the SITA flight tracking application, right? And today we work with Indigo Airlines, Air India Group, Vistara, Air Asia, Go First, even the new startups like Akasa and Alliance, they work with us. If I take the second part of the business where it impacts the airline and airports the most is the airport services. During the pandemic and before the pandemic, it has really transformed. So earlier we were used to working in the old style and everything was fine. But now after the pandemic, people wanted to have a smooth and a walk-through experience at the airport. And that's when we introduced DG Yatra in India. So we're working very closely with the Ministry of Civil Aviation and Airport Authority of India on that program too. But what we helped the industry to do was to use the existing investment which they have made for so many years and how to convert those check-in desks, those kiosks into biometrics or something which you you touch less in terms of the screen while checking in, and then have a walkthrough experience. The other area which I would like to highlight is also on the government side of things. So not so much on the domestic travel, but for the international travel, when you had to do so many document check, right? So are you vaccinated? Do you have the right PCR certificate? So how do you make that life much easier? And to just give some statistics, the average processing time before the pandemic for globally at the airport for a passenger from check-in to boarding was about 1.5 hours. But when the pandemic hit us and it reached almost about, say, if it reaches 80%, that will be close to about 5.5 hours processing time in terms of passenger processing. And when it reaches about 100, it will be almost about 8 hours if we had not addressed the challenge of the documentation. So at SITA, what we did was, we came up with a product which is called Health Protect, which could help all the different countries, different service provider to have a seamless integration of all the health passes, COVID certificate into one platform. So that could help, globally for passenger flying internationally to have that validated through one single application as one platform.
I've taken a couple of international flights and quite a few domestic flights in the past, couple of months. And I've noticed that, as you mentioned, the entire experience is also paperless, right? Like almost everywhere you travel around the world now, you really don't need a boarding pass. You really don't have to show your documents, on paper. So, is that going to stay, or is it going to come back when we think that the pandemic is over or behind us? Or so the question is, has the pandemic in a way changed how the airline industry works, forever, right?
So I would say, Nandu, in fact, what we have done is a very good step. So, these technologies were not just introduced before COVID, because of COVID, right? So they existed even before COVID. So, for example, when we talk about biometrics, in Asia, our first, system which we had implemented was Beijing Capital Airport, right? So there we had implemented a walk-through biometric solution for all the touch points, so 600 touch points. So you can walk through at the time you check in, all the way when you do the backdrop, go through immigration, go even including the duty free, your lounge, and all the way to the gate, right? So this technology existed. However, what COVID did, it accelerated the implementation of digitization, right? So now you see that not only one airport or two airports somewhere in the world, every airport is looking at that. And it is always going to enhance. So, today maybe, when you spoke about the documents are digital, but still you need to show those documents, right? So, for example, if you go to immigration or if you go to gate, even if you don't show them physically, you still have to, scan your barcode or your mobile, barcode to open for the gate to open for you to board. What we are looking at in terms of the technology to transform, and that's what we are doing a lot with DigiYatra also in India and also globally, I would say, is for you to have a walkthrough experience. So just imagine that when you go to the airport, you don't have to even go to the check-in counter. Even when you go for a backdrop, you don't need to talk to anyone. It looks at your face and it says, "Yeah, Nandu, I validated. This is your flight details. This is the gate you're going to go to," and then you have a walkthrough experience all the way, including immigration, including gates. So that will even enhance your travel experience further than just right now. Yeah, it is digital, but still you need to flash your digital identity barcode at various different checkpoints in your journey, and in future that will also go away. You would actually have a walkthrough experience.
So is it also going to be a unified experience across airports, let's say within a specific country, which is not true right now, right? If you're traveling within India, you have one airport which treats you in a different way to another airport which treats you in a completely different way. So you always need to figure out whether you need something in a certain airport. And this goes all the way from having your boarding card to figuring out what the security requirements are in each airport. When are we going to have like a standardized thing, at least within one country?
So I would say, this was exactly the same challenge in 1980s, right? So, if you remember traveling that, years back, when you go to the airport, you will have a designated area for every airline, right? So airline A would have these three counters in that corner, airline B will have another counter in this middle of the airport. And then what used to happen was that when, there are, depending on the flight timings, and they keep changing for every airline, one part of the area will be really congested and the other part will be really free, right? So that's when the common use technology came in, and that's what we've implemented for over 50 airports in India. So any airline can check in from any counters. So that makes their life easy. Now, going back to your question in terms of will it change in terms of the technology, right? So clearly, in India, DigiYatra is what it is aiming at. So you can have that same identity and have exactly the same experience every domestic airport you go to. So within India or within any country is easy to manage, because then you know that there are not too many things of checking visa, not checking too many documents. There are basic document requirements and it can be easily implemented within a country. But what we are looking at is going beyond, like for international travel. So, for example, if you're going from, say, India to London to somewhere, say Geneva, somewhere in Europe, how can you have the same experience at every touch points, even on your international travel? And that's where we have partnered with NEC. And what we are implementing is having this biometric smart card solution, having that globally. So, for example, as I said, SITA is present at almost about 1,000 airports, and so is NEC in a lot of US airports and Europe airports. So, we have partnered with Star Alliance. So, I'm sure you are aware about Star Alliance, right? So, the Star Alliance wants to ensure that they have the same experience for their premium passengers, having the same experience anywhere they travel in the world, any airport they go. So, we are embarking on a project where a Star Alliance passenger traveling at any of these airports where you're transiting would have exactly the same experience. And how that works is that when you go to the first checking point at your first airport, it basically creates your digital identity. And then you, as a passenger, can choose that how you want to use this digital identity, just for that airport, or your connecting airport and to the final destination. And then that gives you the power, what you want and how you want your journey to evolve. And then if once you choose that, I want to do from A to B to C, all the way where you're traveling, then the walkthrough experience, what you'll experience in the airport in India, be it Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, any airport you go through, you'll have exactly the same experience in London Heathrow, and you'll have exactly the same experience in Geneva Airport. And so basically, this technology is real. So it's not something which we need to develop. But the challenge is to get all the stakeholders together and get everyone on the same page, at the same pace. And that is what we are doing, because we are owned by the industry and work with all the stakeholders. We are helping to make that as a real.
So, you at one point mentioned the kind of time that would take to process passengers, given the amount of documentation that is needed extra now, right? But also, if you hit a bottleneck in an airport, it also becomes a health threat, because you really don't want so many people to crowd together, and so close together in a confined space. So is there a lot of real time management that needs to happen? Also foreseeing whether you are going to hit a bottleneck because of any unforeseen issue. How does that work in the back end? How does the technology adapt and adopt to something like that?
So you have a valid point, right? So for and that can be addressed through one of the other services we provide, which is called Airport Management System. So that looks at all your resources. So they will look at how the passenger flow is moving. That also uses the AI and the data. So basically, it will see that what are the peaks, which part of the year there are peaks, what are the flight schedules at what hours of the day. So it has all the data, and basically it gives you, using the AI, gives you the prediction that this area in next 2 hours is going to be really busy. So for example, if it's immigration, you may want to staff that up to ensure that there is no bottleneck. If it's a taxi stand, you know that this is the hour where it's the longest queue for taxis. So how do you manage that? So you may want to connect with the taxi service providers and tell them to flock more taxis to the airport during that time. So this technology does exist, and some part of it we are already working. For example, for our AMS solution with all the Adani airports and the 13 of AI airports. So they have the basic technology. What it needs to be done is to enhance that to the next level, to say how can you embrace the technology, use the data you have to be more effective and more efficient for that airport. And as you realize, the challenge we had before COVID was, they were saying that in next 20 years, the passenger traffic is going to double. Obviously, it slowed down a bit by 2 years because of COVID. But the challenge, at that time, the challenge was that how would the airports and airlines manage the infrastructure? Because you can't build two more airports in every city or every country you go. You have to manage the resources within the resources you have. So that's where the technology is the answer. And how do you get through using the technology, those challenges? So the challenge has not gone away. The passenger traffic went down, but then the document check and the people needed to come to the airport much earlier added the same challenge what the airports and the airlines had. That it had the congestion and they had less resources. So the simple answer to all of this is clearly a technology.
The other thing that I've noticed since the pandemic is that the flight patterns have also changed a little bit. Initially when passenger traffic was much low, maybe because of that it got slotted in a certain way. But I'm seeing, for instance, that a lot of flights which would be multiple hop to reach a certain destination are not there anymore. Like you have a Delhi, Hyderabad, Cochin kind of a flight, and most of these have been replaced by direct flights right now. Is that again something which is going to stay, or as your passenger flow becomes normal or more than normal, is that going to come back to how it used to be?
So to answer that question clearly, the way I look at it is the way we are going in India, right? And the vision, our PM and the civil aviation minister has to connect the smaller cities, right? So earlier, the reason why we had those is because they were limited option to those cities in terms of the flight frequencies, right? But now if you look, the number of frequencies in those smaller cities are also growing really fast as we grow. The air transport grows within our country, right? So for me, the connectivity will still be there, but the way I look at it is that there will be more and more direct flights so that it is easier for the passenger, and there will be more and more connectivity. So there will be more airlines flying to those smaller destinations and smaller regional airports, and they will have more connectivity and more options. So the connecting flights will still be there, but I would say the point to point will continue to grow.
In a post-pandemic world, and since you also work with so many airports, do you think how airports are planned and visualized, is that also going to change? Because will we be thinking about maybe similar scenarios in the future and maybe sort of build that into how we plan?
So in terms of the terminal, certainly in terms of how the passenger processing is done, that will certainly be re-engineered a bit, right, to be more efficient. So to give you an example, like the more and more the check-in and biometrics, the self-check-in and biometrics will come in versus the traditional check-in counter. So that is where I would say the technology would move. But from airport perspective, they would try to utilize the resources they have. And the point which I mentioned earlier, it is really hard for them to rebuild new terminals and new airports in the city. So they will have to be more optimal in the resources what they have, and that is not just the passenger processing. Even for aircraft movement, how can they have more aircraft movement within the constraint or the resources they have? How can they do that? And the turnaround is really key. So how can they have a technology where they can connect all the stakeholders? So in past we had maybe 10 stakeholders in a journey to manage the entire journey, which could be at the ramp, the ground handling staff, the baggage staff. But that has now moved to almost about 100 plus stakeholders, right? So as more stakeholders come in, then you need the technology to make sure that you can communicate with everyone at the same time, and that there is a synergy across all the stakeholders to make your life easier. So in my view, if on the terminal side, yes, certainly the passenger processing and how the passenger flow moves would change. But in terms of the overall infrastructure or the architecture, they can't break and build a new airport or change completely. So what they will have to do is to use the existing resources for most of the airports globally and see how they can make it even more effective and have a better throughput from the same resources they have.
What are the challenges you're foreseeing for the near future? As airlines and travel itself becomes more normal.
I would say in terms of the challenges would be, personally, I would say the growth will be much faster than what we anticipated in past. So, just as we saw in India, right? So the traffic has picked up to almost 2019 level just in no time. The challenges we saw in Europe, they were also not prepared, right? So the baggage issues, the flight delay issues, because the industry really bounced back really, really fast. So one thing that will certainly happen is in terms of that industry will continue to grow, but at the same time, how do we help the airlines to be more effective using the same resources with the help of technology? And two, sustainability, right? So as we go more and more in terms of having more aircrafts, more carbon dioxide, the carbon footprint increasing. So how can we use technology to even help on that area? And there are certain areas, since we are short of time, I can't dwell into more, but certainly there are solutions which can help both airlines and airports to reduce their carbon footprint. And that is again also a technology. So it's kind of a win-win. So you ride on the growth and at the same time make sure that you work on solutions which can help you reduce your carbon footprint.
So you were listening to Sumesh Patel, who's President Asia Pacific at SITA. Sumesh, thanks for being on the show. It was very insightful conversation, and again about a topic we don't talk about a lot, and we just take our airports and our airlines for granted without understanding the kind of work that goes to keep this running, day in day out without any delay.
Thanks, Nandu. Thanks for your time. And clearly, as you rightly said, that there is a lot they've gone through a tough time, but I can tell you that the industry is really, really resilient, and the airports and airline did a fabulous job to make sure that we are back on track, and as a passenger, we can enjoy our journey even better than what we used to do in past.
Sumesh, thank you for being on the show. You were listening to Our Own Devices. We'll be back again next week with another guest. Till then, goodbye. We are available everywhere you listen to your podcast.